I was cruising down a long stretch of highway, the sun setting behind me and painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. The hum of the engine was my constant companion, and the open road stretched out like a welcoming friend. I didn't expect anything unusual to happen that evening, just another routine trip, delivering goods across the country. As I approached a bend in the road, I spotted her. A young woman standing on the shoulder, her thumb out, and a hopeful look in her eyes. She looked out of place, a splash of color against the gray asphalt and dusty surroundings. I slowed down, my curiosity piqued. Picking up hitchhikers wasn't my usual thing, but something about her made me stop. I pulled over, rolled down the window, and called out, "Need a lift?" She stepped closer, a mix of relief and hesitation on her face. "Yeah, if you're heading south." "Hop in," I said, unlocking the door. She climbed in, her small backpack the only luggage she carried. As she settled into the seat, I couldn't help but notice how tired she looked. "Thanks. I'm Victoria," she said, offering a faint smile. "I'm Mason. Where you headed?" "Oklahoma," she replied. "Trying to get home before winter sets in." I nodded, pulling back onto the highway. "Oklahoma, I can get you pretty close. Got a delivery in Tulsa." "That's perfect," she said, a hint of gratitude in her voice. For a while, we drove in silence. The rhythmic thump of the tires on the pavement was oddly comforting. I glanced at her a few times, curious about her story, but not wanting to pry. Finally, she broke the silence. "So, how long have you been driving trucks?" she asked. "About 30 years, I replied. "Started right out of trade school. Figured it was a good way to see the country and make a living." "Do you like it?" she asked, genuinely interested. "Most days, yeah. It has its challenges, but I enjoy the freedom." "And you? What's your story?" Victoria sighed, looking out the window as if gathering her thoughts. "Well, it's a bit of a long story. I've been on the road for a few days now. Hitched a ride with another trucker. But things got complicated." I raised an eyebrow. "Complicated how?" "Let's just say his wife showed up unexpectedly. It wasn't what it looked like, but she wasn't convinced. So I figured it was best to find another ride." I chuckled. "Sounds like you've had quite an adventure." "Yeah, you could say that," she said with a rueful smile. "But I'm glad I ran into you. You seem safe." "Glad to hear it," I said, smiling back. "I try to keep things simple. Just me, my truck, and the open road." We continued talking, the conversation flowing easily. Victoria shared bits and pieces of her life, her dreams of seeing the world, and the family she missed back in Oklahoma. I told her about my travels, the quirky small towns I'd seen, and the freedom of life on the road. As night fell, we pulled into a truck stop. "You hungry?" I asked. "Starving," she admitted. "Let's grab a bite then," I suggested. Inside the diner, we found a booth and ordered burgers and fries. The place was buzzing with truckers and locals, the aroma of greasy food and coffee filling the air. "So, why trucking?" Victoria asked between bites. "Grew up on a farm," I explained. "Realized farming wasn't for me, so I went to trade school. Trucking seemed like a good way to see more of the world. Plus, it pays the bills." She nodded thoughtfully. "Makes sense. I've always wanted to travel, see new places. Guess that's why I ended up hitchhiking." "It's not a bad way to see the country," I agreed. "But it can be risky." "Yeah, I've learned that the hard way," she said, her expression turning serious. We finished our meal and headed back to the truck. As we settled in for the night, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of comfort. Picking up Victoria had been an impulsive decision, but it felt like the right one. As I lay in my bunk, listening to the sounds of the night, I realized that this unexpected hitchhiker might just turn out to be more than a passenger. She could be the start of a new chapter in my life. The next morning, the first light of dawn crept into the truck cab, casting a soft glow over everything. I stretched and yawned, feeling the stiffness in my muscles from the long drive. Victoria was already awake, sitting quietly in the passenger seat, watching the world wake up outside the window. "Morning," I said, rubbing my eyes. "Morning," she replied, turning to me with a small smile. "Thanks for letting me tag along. I slept better than I have in days." "No problem," I said, starting the engine, ready to hit the road. "Absolutely," she said, buckling her seatbelt. "Let's go." As we pulled out of the truck stop and back onto the highway, the miles began to roll by. The landscape changed from flat plains to rolling hills, and the sky was a clear, bright blue. We drove in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds being the hum of the engine and the occasional whoosh of passing cars. "So, what's it like living on the road?" Victoria asked, breaking the silence. "It has its moments," I replied. "Some days are long and lonely, but there's a kind of freedom to it that I wouldn't trade for anything. You get to see places you'd never see otherwise, meet all kinds of people." "Do you ever get lonely?" she asked. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but I've gotten used to it, and it's not so bad when you've got someone to talk to." She smiled. "Glad I can help with that." We talked about all sorts of things as the hours passed. Victoria told me more about her life, about growing up in a small town in Oklahoma, about her family and her dreams of seeing the world. I shared stories from the road, funny encounters with other truckers, and the beauty of the open road. As we crossed into a new state, Victoria suddenly pointed out the window. "Look at that. It's beautiful." I followed her gaze and saw a stunning view of the countryside, the rolling hills dotted with wildflowers and framed by a clear blue sky. I pulled over at a scenic lookout, and we both got out to stretch our legs and take in the view. "Wow," she said, taking a deep breath. "This is amazing. You must see sights like this all the time." "Yeah," I said, smiling. "It's one of the perks of the job." We stood there for a while, just soaking in the beauty of the moment. It felt good to slow down and appreciate the little things, something I didn't do often enough. Back on the road, we continued south, the miles melting away. Victoria seemed more relaxed now, her initial tension easing as we got to know each other better. "Do you ever think about settling down?" she asked suddenly. I glanced at her, surprised by the question. "Sometimes, but I've never found the right reason to stop driving. This is my life, my livelihood. It's hard to imagine doing anything else." She nodded, looking thoughtful. "I get that. It's hard to leave something you love, but sometimes you find something, or someone, that makes you want to stay." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded and kept my eyes on the road. Her words stayed with me, though, making me think about my life in a way I hadn't before. As the sun began to set, we pulled into another truck stop. I parked the truck, and we headed inside for dinner. Over burgers and fries, we continued our conversation, talking about everything and nothing. "I have to say," Victoria said, "this is the best road trip I've ever been on." "Glad to hear it," I said, smiling. "I'm enjoying it too." We finished our meal and headed back to the truck. As we settled in for the night, I felt a sense of contentment I hadn't felt in a long time. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, I didn't mind. With Victoria by my side, I was ready for whatever came next. As I lay in my bunk, listening to the soft sounds of the night, I realized that this journey was more than just a delivery. It was the beginning of something new, something I hadn't expected but was grateful for. And with Victoria beside me, the road ahead seemed a lot brighter. The sun was high in the sky as we crossed the border into Oklahoma. Victoria had fallen asleep, her head resting gently against the window. The quiet rumble of the engine and the rhythmic hum of the tires on the pavement created a soothing backdrop. I glanced over at her, a small smile playing on her lips even in sleep. I couldn't help but think about how much things had changed in such a short time. A few days ago, I was just another trucker on the road. Now I had a companion, someone to share the journey with. It felt good. I pulled into a rest area to stretch my legs and grab a quick snack. Victoria stirred as I parked the truck. "Where are we?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. "Just a rest stop," I said. "Thought we could take a break." She nodded, yawning. "Sounds good." We climbed out of the truck and walked over to a picnic table under a tree. The shade was a welcome relief from the heat. I handed her a soda and a bag of chips. "Thanks," she said, opening the bag and taking a chip. "So, what's next?" I took a sip of my drink, thinking about the question. "Well, I've got a delivery to make in Tulsa. After that, I'm not sure." "Got any plans?" She shrugged. "Not really. Just trying to figure things out, I guess." I nodded, understanding the feeling. "You know," I said, looking at her, "you don't have to go back home right away. If you want, you can keep traveling with me. No pressure, just an option." She looked at me, her eyes thoughtful. "Really? You'd be okay with that?" "Yeah," I said with a smile. "I enjoy your company, and it might be nice to have a co-pilot." She laughed, the sound light and happy. "I could get used to being a co-pilot." "Thanks, Mason." We finished our snack and got back on the road. The miles seemed to fly by with Victoria beside me. We talked about everything and nothing, the conversation flowing easily. It felt natural, like we'd known each other for years. In Tulsa, I made my delivery, and we found a small diner for dinner. The place was cozy, with checkered tablecloths and the smell of home-cooked food filling the air. We settled into a booth, and the waitress brought us menus. "Anything look good?" I asked, scanning the menu. "I think I'll go with the meatloaf," Victoria said, smiling. "Comfort food sounds perfect right now." I nodded in agreement. "Same here. Can't go wrong with meatloaf." As we waited for our food, Victoria looked around the diner, taking in the atmosphere. "You must see a lot of places like this," she said. "Yeah," I replied. "Each one has its own charm. It's one of the things I love about being on the road. You never know what you'll find." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I think I could get used to this life. It's different, but in a good way." Our food arrived, and we ate in companionable silence. After dinner, we headed back to the truck. The night was cool, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the trees. As we settled in for the night, Victoria turned to me. "Mason, thanks for everything. This trip, it's been amazing. I didn't expect any of this." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. "I'm glad you're here, Victoria. It's been great having you along." She reached out and squeezed my hand. "Here's to new beginnings," she said softly. "To new beginnings," I echoed, feeling a sense of hope and possibility. As we drifted off to sleep, the road stretched out ahead of us, full of promise. With Victoria by my side, I knew that no matter where we ended up, it would be an adventure worth taking. The sun was setting as we approached the outskirts of Victoria's hometown. I could feel the tension building in the cab, a thick, almost tangible thing. Victoria had been quiet for the past hour, lost in her thoughts. I reached over and gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "Hey, it's going to be okay," I said softly. She gave me a small, uncertain smile. "I hope so. My parents can be intimidating." "We'll get through it together," I assured her. We turned onto a tree-lined street, the houses growing larger and more impressive as we went. Finally, we pulled up in front of a beautiful, sprawling home with a perfectly manicured lawn. I parked the truck, feeling a bit out of place with my big rig in this upscale neighborhood. "Here we are," Victoria said, taking a deep breath. "Let's do this." We walked up to the front door, and she rang the bell. A moment later, the door swung open, and a woman who looked like an older version of Victoria stood there, a surprised expression on her face. "Victoria, you're home," she exclaimed, pulling her daughter into a tight hug. "And who's this?" "This is Mason," Victoria said, stepping back. "He's been giving me a ride." "Mason, this is my mom, Elaine." "Nice to meet you, ma'am," I said, offering my hand. "Please, call me Elaine," she said, shaking my hand. "Come in, both of you." We stepped inside, and the house was just as impressive on the inside as it was on the outside. High ceilings, elegant furniture, and the smell of something delicious cooking in the kitchen. "Victoria, your father's in his study. Why don't you go get him?" "I'll get us some drinks," Elaine suggested. Victoria nodded and headed down the hall, leaving me alone with her mother. I felt like a fish out of water, but I tried to stay calm. "So, Mason, what do you do?" Elaine asked as she poured us each a glass of iced tea. "I'm a trucker," I said, taking the glass she offered. "Been driving for about 30 years now." "Interesting," she said, giving me a thoughtful look. "And how did you and Victoria meet?" I told her the story of how I had picked up Victoria by the side of the road, leaving out some of the more personal details. Elaine listened carefully, her expression unreadable. Just then, Victoria returned with her father in tow. He was a tall man with a stern face, but his eyes softened when he saw his daughter. "Dad, this is Mason," Victoria said. "Mason, this is my dad, Robert." "Nice to meet you, sir," I said, shaking his hand. "Likewise," he replied, his grip firm. "So, you're the one who brought my daughter home safe and sound. I appreciate that." "Just doing what I could," I said with a smile. We all sat down in the living room, and the conversation flowed more easily than I had expected. Elaine and Robert were curious about my life on the road, and I shared some of my adventures and the places I had seen. Victoria chimed in with her own stories from our journey together. After a while, dinner was ready, and we moved to the dining room. The table was set with fine china and crystal glasses, and the meal was a feast. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, fresh vegetables, and homemade rolls. It was the kind of meal I hadn't had in a long time. "This looks amazing," I said, genuinely impressed. "Thank you," Elaine said, smiling. "I hope you enjoy it." As we ate, the conversation turned more personal. Robert asked about my plans and whether I saw a future with Victoria. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "Honestly, sir, I hadn't planned on any of this, but meeting Victoria has made me think about things differently. I care about her a lot, and I'd like to see where this goes. If she's willing, I'd love for her to keep traveling with me." Victoria reached over and took my hand, her eyes shining. "I want that too," she said softly. Elaine and Robert exchanged a look, and then Robert nodded. "Well, it seems you've both thought about this. Just know that we'll support you, whatever you decide." "Thank you," I said, feeling the surge of relief. "That means a lot." After dinner, we sat in the living room, talking late into the night. I shared more about my life, my dreams of expanding my trucking business, and the freedom of the open road. Victoria talked about her own dreams and how much she had enjoyed our time together. When it was time to leave, Elaine and Robert walked us to the door. "You two take care of each other," Elaine said, hugging Victoria tightly. "And Mason, thank you for bringing our daughter back to us." "It was my pleasure," I said, smiling. As we drove away, Victoria turned to me, her face glowing with happiness. "That went better than I expected," she said. "Yeah, it did," I agreed. "Your parents are good people." She nodded, leaning back in her seat. "I think they like you." "That's a relief," I said, laughing. "I like them too." We drove in comfortable silence for a while, the road stretching out ahead of us. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, it didn't scare me. With Victoria by my side, I felt ready for whatever came next. This was the start of a new beginning, and I couldn't wait to see where it would take us. The weeks turned into months, and Victoria and I settled into a comfortable rhythm on the road. Life in the truck was a mix of long hours, beautiful scenery, and the occasional unexpected challenge. We learned to navigate these challenges together, growing closer with each mile. One morning, as we drove through the Arizona desert, the truck started to make a strange noise. I frowned, listening closely. "Do you hear that?" I asked, glancing at Victoria. She nodded, worry etched on her face. "Yeah, it doesn't sound good." I pulled over at the next rest stop and got out to check the engine. Victoria followed, watching as I lifted the hood and peered inside. "What do you think it is?" she asked. "Not sure yet," I replied, wiping my hands on a rag. "Could be something minor, or it could be something major." We spent the next hour diagnosing the problem, which turned out to be a loose belt. It wasn't a major issue, but it needed fixing before we could continue. Luckily, I had a spare belt and the tools to make the repair. "Hand me that wrench, will you?" I asked, lying on my back under the truck. Victoria passed me the wrench, and I set to work. As I tightened the belt, I couldn't help but smile. Despite the inconvenience, I was grateful for moments like these. They were a reminder that we could handle whatever came our way. "There, that should do it," I said, crawling out from under the truck. "Let's see if it works." We climbed back into the cab, and I started the engine. The strange noise was gone, replaced by the familiar hum. Victoria let out a relieved sigh. "Good job, Mason. You really know your stuff." "Thanks," I said, grinning. "It's all part of the job." We got back on the road, the desert stretching out around us. The sun was high in the sky, casting long shadows on the sand. We drove in comfortable silence, each lost in our thoughts. Later that evening, we pulled into a small town in New Mexico. It was a quiet place, with a handful of shops and a diner. We decided to stop for dinner and a bit of rest. Inside the diner, we found a booth and ordered burgers and fries. As we waited for our food, Victoria looked around, her eyes shining with curiosity. "I love places like this," she said. "They're so full of character." "Yeah," I agreed. "You never know what kind of stories you'll find." Our food arrived, and we ate hungrily. The burgers were juicy, the fries perfectly crisp. As we finished our meal, Victoria reached across the table and took my hand. "Mason, I've been thinking," she said, her voice serious. "I know this life isn't easy, but I love it. I love being on the road with you." "I love it too," I said, squeezing her hand. "And I love having you here with me." She smiled, a soft, happy smile. "I don't ever want to give this up. No matter what comes our way, I want to face it together." "Me too," I said, feeling a swell of emotion. "We'll take on whatever comes, and we'll come out stronger on the other side." As we left the diner and headed back to the truck, I felt a deep sense of contentment. Life on the road was unpredictable, but it was our life, and that made all the difference. Over the next few weeks, we faced more challenges. A flat tire in the middle of nowhere, a sudden storm that made driving treacherous, and a delay at a loading dock that cost us precious time. But through it all, we stayed strong, relying on each other and finding ways to make the best of every situation. One evening, as we sat around a campfire at a truck stop, Victoria turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Mason, have you ever thought about expanding the business? Maybe getting another truck, hiring a driver?" I looked at her, surprised. "I've thought about it, but it always seemed like a big step." "Why do you ask?" "Because I think we could do it," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "We've been managing everything so well. If we had another truck, we could take on more jobs, make more money, and it would be nice to have a bit more stability." I considered her words, feeling a spark of excitement. "You know, you might be right. It would be a lot of work, but I think we could handle it." "Let's do it," she said, her enthusiasm contagious. "Let's take the next step together." And so we started planning. We researched trucks, looked into financing options, and even started interviewing potential drivers. It was a lot of work, but it felt right. We were building something together, and that made all the difference. One afternoon, after a particularly long day, we parked the truck and climbed into the back to rest. As we lay there, Victoria snuggled close to me. I felt a deep sense of contentment. "Mason," she whispered, "I love you." "I love you too," I said, kissing the top of her head. "And I can't wait to see what the future holds for us." With Victoria by my side, I knew we could handle anything. The trials we faced only made us stronger, and the triumphs we shared brought us closer. Life on the road was full of ups and downs, but with her, every moment was worth it. The weeks turned into months, and Victoria and I found our rhythm on the road. Life was good, and we were enjoying every moment together. We had just finished a delivery in Denver and were headed to our next pickup in Kansas City. As we drove through the vast plains, I couldn't help but think about how far we had come since that day I picked her up by the side of the road. One morning, as we were cruising down the highway, Victoria looked over at me with a serious expression. "Mason, there's something I've been meaning to talk to you about." I glanced at her, sensing the gravity in her voice. "What's on your mind?" She took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. "I've been thinking about our future. I love being on the road with you, but I also want to have a place we can call home. Somewhere we can go back to after our trips." I nodded, understanding her desire. "I get that. I've thought about it too. We could buy a small house, maybe somewhere central so we can easily get to our deliveries." "Exactly," she said, her face lighting up with excitement. "I was thinking maybe Kansas City. It's central, has a good cost of living. And it's a nice place." I smiled, the idea taking root in my mind. "Kansas City sounds perfect. Let's start looking into it." We spent the next few weeks researching houses, making calls, and arranging viewings. It was a new adventure for us, and the thought of having a place to call our own filled us with excitement. We found a cozy little house with a big yard on the outskirts of the city. It needed some work, but we could see its potential. One evening, after a long day of house hunting, we sat on the porch of the house we both loved. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over everything. I turned to Victoria, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. "Victoria," I began, taking her hand in mine. "I know this is a big step, but I can't imagine doing it with anyone else. Will you move in with me? Make this place our home?" Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. "Yes, Mason. I want that more than anything." We sealed the deal, and soon the house was ours. We spent our free time fixing it up, turning it into a place we could be proud of. It was hard work, but it was also incredibly rewarding. As we settled into our new home, another turning point came our way. One evening, as we were unpacking boxes in the living room, Victoria looked at me with a serious expression. "Mason, there's something else I need to tell you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I stopped what I was doing and walked over to her, concern etched on my face. "What is it?" She took a deep breath, her eyes locked onto mine. "I'm pregnant." For a moment, I was speechless. Then, a wide smile spread across my face as the news sank in. "That's incredible, Victoria. We're going to be parents." Tears of joy streamed down her face as she hugged me tightly. "I know it's unexpected, but I couldn't be happier. I can't wait to start this new chapter with you." We spent the next few months preparing for the baby, turning one of the rooms into a nursery, and making sure everything was ready for our new arrival. The anticipation and excitement filled our days, and the love we felt for each other only grew stronger. One evening, as we sat on the porch, watching the stars twinkle in the night sky, Victoria turned to me with a contented smile. "Mason, I never thought my life would turn out this way. I never imagined I'd find someone like you, build a home, and start a family. I'm so grateful for everything." I squeezed her hand, feeling the same overwhelming gratitude. "Me too, Victoria. You've changed my life in ways I never thought possible. I can't wait to see what the future holds for us." As we sat there, wrapped in each other's arms, I realized that life was full of unexpected turning points. Each one had brought us closer together, made us stronger, and filled our lives with love and joy. No matter what came our way, I knew we would face it together, ready for whatever the road ahead had in store for us. The early morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow across the room. I woke up to the soft sounds of birds singing outside and the gentle breathing of Victoria beside me. Our little house in Kansas City felt more like home every day, and the life we were building together was everything I had ever dreamed of. I slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to wake Victoria, and headed to the kitchen to make breakfast. As I cracked eggs into the skillet and brewed a pot of coffee, I thought about how much our lives had changed over the past year. We had gone from living on the road to settling down, from being just two people in a truck to becoming a family. Victoria entered the kitchen, her hand resting on her growing belly. "Good morning," she said, smiling sleepily. "Something smells good." "Morning," I replied, grinning. "Just making us some breakfast. How are you feeling?" "Pretty good," she said, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "Baby's been kicking a lot lately. I think they're getting ready to meet us." I placed a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of her. "Not long now," I said, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. "Are you ready for this new chapter?" Victoria nodded, her eyes shining with anticipation. "More than ever. I can't wait to meet our little one." As we ate breakfast, we talked about the nursery, the names we had picked out, and all the things we needed to do before the baby arrived. It felt good to plan and prepare, to create a future together. Later that day, we decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. The air was crisp, and the trees were just starting to show the first signs of autumn. We held hands as we walked, enjoying the peacefulness of the moment. "You know," Victoria said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I never imagined my life would turn out this way. I never thought I'd settle down, have a home, and start a family. But now, I can't imagine it any other way." I squeezed her hand, feeling the same sense of wonder. "Me neither. You've made my life better in so many ways. I can't wait to see what the future holds for us and our little one." We continued walking, talking about our hopes and dreams for the future. It was amazing to think about how far we had come, from that first day on the road to where we were now. As the weeks went by, we put the finishing touches on the nursery, assembling the crib and hanging up tiny clothes. We attended childbirth classes and read all the parenting books we could get our hands on. The anticipation built with each passing day. Finally, the day arrived. Victoria went into labor early one morning, and we rushed to the hospital. It was a long and exhausting process, but she was strong and determined. I held her hand, offering words of encouragement, and together we faced the challenge. Hours later, the doctor placed a tiny, crying bundle into Victoria's arms. Tears of joy streamed down our faces as we looked at our newborn baby, perfect in every way. "Welcome to the world, little one," Victoria whispered, her voice filled with love. "We're so glad you're here." I reached out and touched our baby's tiny hand, feeling an overwhelming surge of emotion. "We're a family now," I said, my voice choked with tears. "I can't believe it." We named our baby Lily, after Victoria's grandmother. As we settled into our new roles as parents, we faced sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, and all the challenges that came with having a newborn. But through it all, we were a team, supporting each other and finding joy in the little moments. One evening, as we sat on the porch with Lily asleep in her crib, Victoria turned to me with a contented smile. "Mason, this is everything I've ever wanted. Thank you for being my partner, for making this life with me." I wrapped my arm around her, feeling the same deep sense of gratitude. "Thank you for being my co-pilot, for making every day an adventure." "I love you, Victoria." "I love you too," she said, leaning her head on my shoulder. "Here's to a new chapter, filled with love, laughter, and endless possibilities." As we sat there, watching the stars twinkle in the night sky, I knew that no matter what came our way, we would face it together. Our journey had been full of twists and turns, trials and triumphs, but it had brought us to this moment, to this new chapter in our lives. And with Victoria and Lily by my side, I knew that the road ahead would be the greatest adventure of all.